I had 2 months of feeling like that before I was able to get to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester. Thank goodness. They've treated 3,000 long COVID patients. They told me that they have seen tons of voice changes, even though no one else they've treated was a professional singer. But they put me on a protocol where you essentially treat long COVID like a disease of the nervous system. But the crux of the problem is that in people with long COVID, your immune system keeps responding as if you have an active infection. So it's either responding to dead virus that's left in the body that the body can't clear, or there has just been a kind of maladaptive function that has been offset. The immune system function no longer is responding. It's no longer calibrated the way it should be, so it keeps fighting as if you're actively sick. And when your immune system overreacts like that, it causes a lot of inflammation in the body, particularly in the nervous system. And so that's what can cause chronic fatigue syndrome and, heightened sensitivity to sensory experiences and what's called dysautonomia.
I'm Garrett Salpeter, and I believe that the most powerful and transformative way to help people recover from pain and injury, heal from trauma, and reach their highest levels of fitness and performance is to focus on the nervous system. In this podcast, we'll share knowledge from the frontiers of neuroscience and inspirational stories of how applying that knowledge has empowered people from all walks of life to heal, adapt, and grow. Hello, NeuFit Nation, and welcome back to the Undercurrent podcast. My guest today it's a wonderful honor because she is my sister. Ever since she was born, she's been my sister. And she has had just a fascinating career. She's been a professional musician since the age of 16. I remember when Pete Wentz from Fall Out Boy was over at our house offering to sign her to his record label. So if you've ever been in the car with me, you've probably heard me play something from her band, either the Hush Sound, her original band, or Springtime Carnivore, which was her sort of next big project. And then more recently, she was also in the band Vampire Weekend and had a really great, first part of her career as a musician. And then in the last few years, she's been on really an amazing journey that we will talk about today and that she writes about in her book that's coming out around the time we're recording this podcast in May of 2025. Her book is called The Lost Voice. So Greta, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me, Garrett. You're my favorite podcast host.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you. So you were playing, since playing shows, recording records full time since you were 16 or 17, right?
Yeah, the Hush Sound started when I was 15, and I didn't really think it was possible to be a professional musician. But then we were signed to Fall Out Boy's record label, which was such a pleasant surprise. And yeah, so I guess I became a professional, I think around 16, 17. I got signed when I was 16. We made our next record when I was 17.
And then your first tour was, I got to go when I was in college. I drove down from Vermont to Philadelphia to see you play opening for Fall Out Boy, but that was the spring of your senior year of high school, right?
Yeah, so I was a Catholic school virgin who went, sorry, that's TMI for my brother, but that's a good side for my brother. No, I was a very, very innocent Catholic school nerd on my first arena tour. I took 6 weeks off my senior year, and then I would do my homework in the catering area. I remember emailing Mr. White, like begging him to not flunk me. And I would email my teachers from the catering area and go on stage and perform for 15,000 people. And then we would drive ourselves to the next show. And when the tour was done, I had to go back to school and take my finals, which putting my uniform on after that experience was wild.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you continued on with music. It's funny. People ask me sometimes, or it comes up in conversation, the notion of going to college. And I say, well, one of the smartest, most intellectually curious people that I know is my sister. And she didn't go to college because she was touring musically. So you just continued on, for 15 years?
Yeah. I mean, there were moments where I thought, should I go to school? But what was happening was it kept feeling like I had one once in a lifetime moment after another. I was like, well, I can't possibly skip the arena tour. This is once in a lifetime. And I was like, well, I can't possibly skip. This is once in a lifetime. Well, I can't. I need to join Vampire Weekend. This is once in a. Like I kept having those. So yeah, I never wound up going to college. I do. I read a lot. I don't think I'm actually a good academic participant because I can only finish the books I'm obsessed with.
That's fair. I mean, the number one prerequisite for effective learning is curiosity or interest in the subject matter. So
Mhm.
I remember, all the times I was in school, I was reading stuff because I had to, and I wasn't really into it. And, I would finish the page and think, oh, what did I just read? Or, I'm just, when you're not as interested in it, it's so,
Yeah.
it's a whole other topic. But,
Yeah.
um, when you, so can you set the stage for, your book is The Lost Voice. We talked about this most recent stage of your musical touring career when you had joined the band Vampire Weekend. Can you talk about sort of the phase where you started to have some health issues and that possibility of continuing on
Yeah.
got called into question?
Yeah. So as we were leading up to 2020, I was playing in Vampire Weekend and I had just loved the experience of performing these huge, euphoric shows all over the world. Headlining, I mean, you saw us headline Lollapalooza in Chicago. They were some of the biggest, most incredible live performance experiences of my whole life. And it had really lit this fire in me, like that my next solo record was going to be amazing. And so, in addition to having this 96 song catalog memorized and just, all their songs at the tip of my finger, I was also training my voice to make a vocally demanding album. I was writing in every free minute. I was demoing, I was recording, I was like getting ready to make the kind of indie, female singer record of my dreams. And I felt in January of 2020, the band did a tour in Australia, and we landed there in the country's worst wildfire season in history. And the skies were just full of smoke. And I noticed when I was warming up my voice in Australia, something was wrong. Like there was just this flicker of weakness in my upper register, kind of like cobwebs in the attic. But I just wrote it off. I was like, oh, it's the smoke, it's the jet lag, I'm probably dehydrated. I just ignored it. And my instinct was to train harder. I had toured with the Zombies as an opening act in 2014, and Colin Blunstone, the lead singer, who has one of my favorite voices, he told me that for every year he ages, he adds a minute to his vocal warm up. So my instinct, when I felt that little flicker of weakness, my instinct was, oh, I better train harder. I better push harder. And then in March of 2020, the band played one last festival in Okeechobee, Florida, right as the world was shutting down for the pandemic. A lot of other festivals that weekend were canceled. When I came back, I was very sick with a super high fever. It got up to 103. And after the fever kind of broke, I mean, I assume I had COVID. Now that I've had COVID multiple times since then, I know that they felt exactly the same. But after the fever broke and my body kind of started to repair itself at my next vocal lesson, that little flickering weakness I had felt in Australia, all of a sudden it had spread through my whole upper vocal range. So I couldn't hold a pitch, I couldn't hold a note, when I tried to sing, my voice like shook uncontrollably. And it took many months to find out what it was, but I was eventually diagnosed by many specialists with spasmodic dysphonia, which is essentially when the vocal cords spasm involuntarily. So normally when we're singing, our vocal cords close between each word. So they open for us to speak, they close between. And when you have dysphonia, they close all the time, so it makes it very hard to hold a pitch. In most people with spasmodic dysphonia, like RFK is probably the most famous voice right now with that. The journalist Diane Rehm has it. But in most people, spasmodic dysphonia is more audible in their speaking voice and their singing voice is clearer. I have the inverse. which is a rarer case. So mine is more audible on my singing voice than my speaking voice, though it has affected my singing voice or my speaking voice at times. And when I was diagnosed, they said, there's three things that trigger this: psychological stress, a fever, and vocal overuse. Is there any chance you've experienced any of these? And I was just like, check, check, check. So it was like a perfect storm. And that was my first COVID experience, knocked out my voice. And then I've had it two subsequent times. I do not write about this part of it in the book, but the two subsequent times actually really have challenged my body and my nervous system. And I've had to quit touring completely to focus on rehabilitation and recovery. Ironically, in the treatment for COVID from the second and third infections, some of the Mayo Clinic's program that I've been on, it has really helped my speaking voice. Like, even all my students who come to workshops, once a year, they're like, oh my God, your speaking voice sounds so much better than last year at this time. And I was like, yeah, I know. So it's like, the whole thing has been such a mysterious process. But I do know that spasmodic dysphonia is in the limbic part of the brain. So it's like the emotional center. So everything affects my voice: stress, driving in terrible traffic, too much sleep, or I'm sorry, too little sleep, too much caffeine. Everything will change the sound of my voice.
I do want to, at some point, talk a little more about the experience you've had with the various treatments and what has finally moved the needle in a positive direction, and,
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit medical, because many of the people listening to this are clinicians and will be interested in that. But I also just think your story is fascinating. I'm grateful to have gotten to read a advanced copy of the book, and I loved it. It was a page turner for me. I really loved the story, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this concept of identity. You just spoke about like this euphoric high of playing these shows and having really mastered a 96 song catalog, so you could go out and play anything live, and just how that was this high point in your career, to then losing the thing that you really went out there to show off every night. I want to hear that, and also we talk a lot about on this podcast about identity. Sometimes it's in the case of the physical therapist who really gets that sense of self-worth from treating patients, and then has to become more of a leader of other people and sort of transition out and stuff like that. And even if it's something that they choose, it can be tough. But when it's thrust upon you, not of your choosing, I think it can certainly be even more challenging. Can you talk about sort of that theme, and how how your identity evolved and changed through that, your sense of self-identity?
Yeah, well, I will say my voice was the core of my identity. I mean, I have written songs on my voice almost every day since I was a little kid. So it was how I expressed the truths of my inner world. It was how I understood what was happening with me. One thing I say in the book is like, my songs always told me the truth long before my conscious mind could. So just I would sing feelings, and all of a sudden I would just have mirrored back at me the deeper truth than what I could consciously realize. And then singing was how I formed friendships, so often through performance, is how I met the people I fell in love with. It was my livelihood. And it was like music, songwriting, and touring. Um, it was the dream that I devoted everything to. I sacrificed so much for it. I sacrificed relationships. I missed really important family vacations. I still regret not going to Alaska. Um, but I missed Grandma Lynn's funeral. I missed Aunt Harriet's funeral. Like, I miss things that are so important to the core of who I am, because music, because I was giving everything to music. And so having it taken away, it really felt like I was dying, but my body was still here. It's so hard to explain the sensation to someone who hasn't, it's so hard to articulate the exact quality of the sensation, but it felt like I was disappearing, even though I was walking around like a person who looked like myself. There was just this incredible amount of kind of dissociation that came from it. Um, And I think ultimately, I write about it in more granular detail in the book, but I had to really kind of parse out, well, who am I without this? And I think when a person's sense of identity falls away, there's two really important things. The first thing is just admitting and surrendering to being lost and starting to really follow your intuition. It's like you can never become found if you won't admit that you are lost. So surrendering to just like, okay, this is what's happening. I'm accepting what's happening. What do I need to do next? So really following intuition, following the poet William Stafford says to follow even the most trivial hunch. And I think for me at that time, I just knew I needed to be close to wilderness. I knew I needed to be in the desert because it seemed to mirror the kind of emotional sensation I was having inside. And I knew also that I needed to express myself even though I couldn't sing, and that's why I started writing on the page. And then I think the other thing when a person loses their sense of identity is to just start asking the question, what do I really love? Because so often we get caught up in what other people think our identity is. So often we want to perform the version of ourselves that other people expect us to be. I remember the day that I kind of announced to my audience that I probably would not be performing in the near future or at all. And I shared the diagnosis and what had been happening. I put my phone down after I shared it, and I remember thinking, oh God, I'm letting everyone down. Like, I can't be the person they want me to be. I can't be the person they think that I am. And of course, the reception was like so kind and so loving, and people really empathized with what I was going through. But asking this question, what do I love? That was how I have rebuilt this new version of life that is not one I would have chosen, but actually one I'm really enjoying.
I love I love both of those where you talk about surrendering. To me, that really is acknowledging it rather than hiding from it. It's like in meditation, oftentimes the teaching or mindfulness, the teaching is to pay attention to when a feeling arises rather than resist it or try to suppress it, just to meet it. So you're meeting the reality, meeting the truth of what's there. And then I love that, really using that as a catalyst to ask that question. So what was your answer? When you ask yourself, what do I really love? If I can't sing, if I, what's your answer to that question?
Yeah, what do I really love? Like, I love reading by the creek. I love cooking dinner with my friends. I love working on my friend's farm. I love writing. I love listening to music. It turns out I love teaching, thank God, because that's the thing that I am doing, primarily. Primarily, I'm writing and teaching during this period of time. I love studying depth psychology and my own dreams and sort of looking at my psyche as its own wilderness. um, those are the things I love, and those are the things that give me a sense of who I am now, especially now that I'm not like performing and being witnessed in the way that I used to be.
And you mentioned the teaching. So can you share a little bit more about what you've been teaching? I think it's so cool how you've been able to take everything you've learned and really pay it forward to the next generation of songwriters.
Yeah, well, I teach a class every year called Writing Your Record. It's 12 weeks long, and everyone in the class writes an entire record. It is like it's a creative marathon. It's incredible. But I also teach other classes. I teach one called the Lyrical Landscape, which is a lyric writing class. I do some one-on-one work. I think I might teach a memoir class this fall, just because I feel like the process of writing my own life story helped me understand my life so much better in a way that has enriched every aspect of my days. I wish that everyone would write a memoir, even if they didn't publish it. I just think writing the story of your life and understanding sort of your own personal myth, like the story that's being lived through you, I think it's so important.
That's awesome. I've read two recently that really spoke to me. One is the advanced copy of your book, The
Mhm.
Lost Voice, May 2025. Buy it on Amazon or in your local bookstore. And then also, I read, I had it recommended to me several times over the years, but I read the story of Phil Knight, the guy who founded Nike. And
Hmm.
it was really fascinating to see his story and all the challenges he went through, and I could literally see myself. I mean, I'm not saying NeuFit is anywhere near Nike, but to see the challenges that he went through with getting bank financing for products and different things and starting a company, I was like, it was really inspiring to see other people going through those challenges. Of course, knowing that he came through it the way that he did was very inspiring. So I love reading other people's stories. And I'm curious, on the other side, writing a memoir, which is different than my book writing experience. You talk about how that process changed you. You have some many really interesting stories in there. A lot of great things come out. What was the process like? In terms of mapping out the book, picking what you were going to share. There's a common thread and kind of some themes throughout the
Yeah.
story. What was that writing process like?
Yeah. Well, actually, firstly, though that's such a good question, I'm excited to go into it. But one thing I just want to say is like your personal myth has always been very interesting to me in the sense that, like, I saw you train I mean, you were shooting hockey pucks every single day for hours after school. Like, I saw you train so hard at this sport that you loved and then have injuries that essentially knocked you out of the sport at a point. And that, I feel like that was the origin of NeuFit. Like it was a pretty classic story of your wounding becoming the access point for a healing. That
Yeah.
then you were able to, you were able to treat yourself, but you were able to share this gift with just, I mean, at this point, probably millions of people.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I really set out to give people the sort of healing, recovery, rehabilitation resources that I wished I had when I was
Yeah,
going through that stuff. So yeah, 100%. That's a great insight.
yeah, yeah. So for the book, I was writing extensively the whole time I've been living this story, which now is about 5 years. But I began really pinpointing that it was going to be a book and it was going to be this story in the summer of 2023. That's when I started building the book that's when I signed with my agent, started building the proposal. I had dramatically overwritten, so I think I had like 350,000 words. A typical book is maybe 70,000. So the challenge for me was tightening, like pulling things in and tightening them and connecting and kind of streamlining it. And the way that I chose each scene for each chapter was that it had to do with an aspect of the voice. So every chapter, like for example, chapter 2 is called Someone Who Needed to Write Songs, and it's about my childhood and also the kind of experience of having an artistic voice break through for the first time. And then it also weaves in some of the origin stories of my own favorite artists. And so every scene there is like, what does it mean for a voice to appear, for a voice to break through? What does it mean to cultivate that voice? What happens when you start sharing that voice? And then there's a later chapter, which is sort of about finding a new voice once I went solo after having played with men forever. But it's also about like my larger metaphorical voice as a woman. Like there's a scene where this kind of music industry bully attacks me and I couldn't speak. Like I couldn't speak in that moment. And so I'm kind of pondering these questions of like, how am I the kind of person who can sing for 18,000 people on stage and yet I can't speak my truth to one bully? And so I was kind of looking at some of the cultural conditioning around voice and my relationship with my voice and my ability to speak my truth.
Thank you so much for listening to the Undercurrent podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how NeuFit and the New Beat can impact your life, please visit our website at www.new.fit, that's neu.fit, so you can learn more about how it might integrate into your professional practice, how you can use it as a patient, and you can also connect with our team there. Yeah, that's really powerful. And you talk about aspects of voice there. It's obviously more than just speaking and frequencies. It's setting boundaries. It's interacting with people. It's relationship. It's connection. It's so many other aspects of it. So I mean, just love the book. I do. Sorry to pitch again, but encourage everyone to read
Thank
it.
you.
I'd be I would like to shift gears for a moment and talk a little bit about the medical experience, because it is fascinating. People listening to this may have had or have a friend or family member who has dealt with various symptoms of long COVID. And there's things like chronic fatigue, more rarely things like you have experienced with spasmodic dysphonia, but there can be different sort of things. So first of all, you alluded to it a little bit, but can you talk about the sort of challenge in getting the diagnosis and sort of finding some preliminary answers?
Yeah, yeah. Well, to be diagnosed with long COVID, the doctors take into account your health history sort of before and after, and then they also look to see if you have antibodies and they measure your cytokine levels and count inflammatory markers. At some places, they'll do a PET scan, like a brain scan, and basically they diagnose you by ruling out everything else. So for me, strangely, the version of COVID that did the worst damage was the mildest case. So I would say it did the worst full body damage was in 2023 in November. I wasn't even going to test for COVID. I thought I had a little sniffle, a little cold. And then the people who I had been with the day before said, "Oh, we all just tested positive for COVID." Um, but yeah, the physical and neurological ramifications I experienced after that made losing my voice look easy. Like, just it felt the way chronic fatigue felt at its worst. It feels like being under anesthesia all the time, and not in like a fun I'm on fentanyl way. like in a I can't think, I feel like I'm drugged, I wouldn't feel comfortable driving a car. I know I'm hungry, but like what do I have to do to even get food? I like it feels like it felt like disappearing, like um just it just felt like everything that made me all, the answer to the question, the what do I love, like it was so hard to even feel and experience that. So I had about, let's see, November, December, January. I had 2 months of feeling like that before I was able to get to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Thank goodness. They've treated 3,000 long COVID patients. They told me that they have seen tons of voice changes, even though no one else they've treated was a professional singer. But they put me on a protocol where you essentially treat long COVID like a disease of the nervous system. So the way that it was explained to me based on their studies, by January of 2024, when I was treated there, the way it was explained to me is that when people have long COVID, which I'm pretty sure they said 80% of the long COVID cases they saw were women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. I haven't found much publicly shared information, but I guess, they were giving me some like insider scoop, anecdotal scoop. But the crux of the problem is that in people with long COVID, your immune system keeps responding as if you have an active infection. So it's either responding to dead virus that's left in the body that the body can't clear, or there has just been a kind of maladaptive function that has been offset. The immune system function no longer is responding. It's no longer calibrated the way it should be, so it keeps fighting as if you're actively sick. And when your immune system overreacts like that, it causes a lot of inflammation in the body, particularly in the nervous system. And so that's what can cause chronic fatigue syndrome and, heightened sensitivity to sensory experiences and what's called dysautonomia. So dysautonomia is like an extreme dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system, which controls your breathing, your heart rate. What else? You know more than me about the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
controls digestion, waste
Yeah.
elimination, blood pressure. Did you ever have, like, a lot of people with dysautonomia? Dysautonomia. One of the telltale signs is often getting up and feeling lightheaded because your blood pressure can't adjust quickly enough to adjust blood flow to your brain.
Right. Yeah. It's like POTS. They call
Yeah.
that. Yeah. I almost had POTS. I was like 1 point away from
Mhm.
being diagnosed with it. But thank goodness, once I went on the Mayo Clinic's program, I mean, it was an arduous process of learning how to care for my body in this completely altered version of reality. Like my health before this, I mean, I played 2.5 hour sets. I'd walk 10 or 15 miles on days off around European cities. I'd like shoot up, like climb 2,000 feet elevation to the top of Yosemite. I would swim across lakes. I mean, just I considered my body to be like a perfect machine. I never got flu shots. I never got the flu. I haven't thrown up since Andrew brought the flu to Thanksgiving when I was 14, our cousin Andrew. Like that was it. And so I had like a very strong constitution. So, yeah, learning to care for my body in this new norm was a very arduous process, but within about 6 or 7 months I started being able to exercise again. I started being able to um, to work for longer periods of time without having to lie down. I started feeling more desire to socialize. And um, yeah, I mean, so much of the time I was sick, I didn't even play music because sitting up at the piano was so much energy, like just holding my spine straight to sit up was so much energy. But thankfully, so the long COVID program, within 6 months, it started showing me some incredible improvements. And, I've had some ups and downs since then. I've had some better days, a week where I'll have a dip or whatever, but I am able to like live a beautiful life now. I'm exercising again. I'm out in the mountains. I'm working on my friend's farm. I'm writing, I'm teaching, I'm going to travel to do the book promo, which is a huge deal to feel confident to be able to do that. So I'm trusting the body's ability to repair when it's given the circumstances to repair.
Amen. Amen to that. One interesting thing when you were talking about inflammation sort of being out of control, there's a really interesting phenomenon in the body. Our nervous systems and also specifically mitochondria sense the presence of inflammation in our system. And when the body senses inflammation, there's a supposition to the degree that the body has consciousness, right? But there's a supposition that the inflammation is present because there's some sort of acute illness. And so when there's an acute illness, the body functions as if it needs to send all the energy and resources to fight that, and it doesn't want to spend extra energy and resources for muscle function so we feel weak, or for high level cognitive function. So it's difficult to like solve complex math or engineering problems, or write music, or stuff that takes really high level frontal lobe activity. And all that energy gets spared so it can be shunted towards fighting an infection. So it is oftentimes when there's chronic fatigue, there is dysregulation within the immune system, and that's a very clear mechanism. And that's the same reason that people will feel sluggish or brain fog after some meals, because if they eat foods that they're reacting to, that causes a temporary rise in inflammation in response to that food, and then that kicks off that same process that promotes lethargy in the muscles and in the brain. So just an interesting sort of mechanism there. I'm so glad to hear and see and know that you're doing better. And can you talk about what has moved the needle for you? Of course, we'll give the caveat that neither of us is prescribing or recommending anything else for anyone in particular, but this is a fascinating case study. So can you talk about what you've done along the way and what you feel has been most beneficial?
Absolutely. Well, one thing I'll say, I'm actually going to share on my Substack a long COVID resources doc, which will probably be out by the time we air this. So if people want to look that up, they can. So from the Mayo Clinic, I generally avoid prescriptions. Like I have historically always chosen a functional medicine approach rather than gone on a prescription. But Mayo Clinic put me on something called guanfacine, which is a it's actually a children's ADHD non-stimulant medication. And the Mayo Clinic uses it what do they call it?
Off label.
off-label,
Mhm.
because it calms your nervous system and it regrows neurological networks. It reconnects neurological networks. So that's the one prescription that I'm on. And when I first went on it, the only side effect was that I had wild dreams. Like I had a dream that I was riding around on the back of a tiny crab all night. And I remember telling the Mayo Clinic nurse, like, crustacean transportation could be worse. And she was like, yes, but it could be better. Let us know if the dreams continue. Um, but so that's the one prescription, and then the rest of their protocol is totally holistic. So I do something called the True Vega, which is a vagus nerve stimulator, and it's just direct onto my vagus nerve. I do that 2 minutes 3 times a day. I take kefir to keep the gut healthy, and then there's a
As in the
combination.
fermented yogurt-like product. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's a combination of L-arginine, NAC, and vitamin C, which together widen the blood vessels so that the body can clear any remaining dead virus. And then also, I take a very fancy fish oil, Metagenics fish oil. So I can share that whole list. The other thing is that they actually teach a holistic approach for how to care for your body with a nervous system disease. So I learned about energy pacing and sort of staying within my energy envelope for the day. I learned about how to set very clear boundaries. I learned about not catastrophizing. For example, on really bad days, there was a period of time where I was just like, I don't want to live like this. If this doesn't get better, this is not a life. This is not a life I want to live. And they teach you how to use cognitive behavioral therapy so that when you're in a moment like that, instead of catastrophizing and going off into the future, you just say, okay, this is a really bad day. This is really hard. And I'm proud of myself. Like, this is a really hard day. I know what to do on bad days. And I have my plan of the things that I know will help. And I just have to be patient. So I think that was really helpful. I also have been doing the Gupta brain retraining program. So brain retraining essentially relies on the brain's ability for neuroplasticity to teach you to respond differently when a symptom arises. Because so often when we have a symptom, if we stress about it, we exacerbate the symptom. It's like one of those cruel jokes that's it's like written into the body, my God. But basically, through brain retraining, I've learned that when a symptom arises, I disconnect from any story. So I disconnect from like, long COVID has taken my life away. I had to quit my job that I love. I'll never be normal again. Like, I disconnect from the whole story and just feel what's happening as a sensation. And I had this huge aha moment. I was doing this 30-minute meditation and I was feeling like, okay, disconnected from any story, what does fatigue actually feel like? And I just kind of felt like my body was very heavy. My face felt very kind of calm and smooth. And I had this moment where I was like, wait a second, fatigue, this feels great. Like, if it's not part of a story about my life being taken away, the actual experience is pleasant. And that was just like a huge, huge revelation for me about the power of, what my mind can do. They say the thing about like there are two wolves inside you and, figure out which one to feed. I want to feed the wolf that's like, I just need more rest than other people. It's fine. Like I just need more rest. I've renamed long COVID Sleeping Beauty syndrome. Um, I just need more rest. I just need more rest. And when I don't stress, I have more energy. And the fact that I have improved already sequentially, every season I've had, like, I still have ups and downs, but overall my trajectory is going up. So I'm just like that's giving me a lot of hope.
Yeah. I think some people listening to this are going to want to know, if you're using the vagus nerve stimulator, have you used the master reset? And I know we've talked about,
Yes.
I'll let you tell.
Well, I love the master reset. I do a master reset like at least once a week. I probably could do it more. But it is one of my favorite feelings. And recently I have been pairing it with deep pressure therapy with a sandbag on my chest. Have we talked about this ever? Or do you
No,
ever?
no.
Oh, I found this through the trainer Tim Matz. He has this program called Move Like Human. But deep pressure therapy, it's like an extreme nervous system calmer. You put a sandbag on your chest and you kind of work on breathing through different areas of your body. But the combination of that with the master reset is better than any drug I've ever taken. I won't say which drugs those are.
Wow, cool.
Yeah.
All right, we'll have to. I want to try out that combination too.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
good.
And I would like to do more of the microcurrent stuff too.
Yeah, I remember we did that like Vegas nerve frequencies and stuff, and
Hmm.
that's yeah, good. That's good. Well, gosh, I'm so glad that you're improving and have this opportunity to share your book with the world here. I do want to go back to the book a little bit. One of the things I remember most from reading it was the section called "The Desert Cracks You Open,"
That's my
and
favorite chapter.
you had mentioned earlier that when you were confronting this question of what do you really love, one of them was being in the wilderness, and I of course know and followed along and was with you for some of them, but got to go on these different journeys and stay near national parks and spend time in different places. So um, can you we'll shift from the more serious medical back to a little more of the narrative here. Can you talk about specifically that and anything else you'd like to weave in from your other wilderness adventures? Because you did some cool stuff along this path too.
Yeah. Well, so when I guess after my voice went out, I found out that my house in Los Angeles was full of mold, which I figured, oh, this is the problem. The mold. I have to get out of here. I moved out of my house and it kind of launched me into this nomadic adventure, which began with a month at Zion National Park in Springdale, Utah. And while I was there, I met a woman who has since become one of my best friends. In the book, she's called Sadie. And she is a wilderness guide who would lead people on rites of passage. So, ceremony, like a 3 or 4 day solo camping experience in a very remote and wild place. And one of the things I wrote about in the book is like, I knew about other cultures who are more deeply rooted to indigenous ways doing things like this. Like there are Aboriginal walkabouts and there are Native American vision quests. But I felt a little bit like a rootless American, just like, I don't know what I can do. There's nothing linked to my specific culture. But to me, she had given me the simplest possible framework, which was camp alone in a wild place and just sit with the question, like ask the powers that be, what do you want from me? Like that's it. And it can be just that simple. It doesn't necessarily need to have a huge framework. And I do think, our bodies are basically little pinched off pieces of earth. So it's just that simple to go sit in a natural environment and reconnect with the source of all of our life. So yeah, to me, I had some huge revelations that came during that trip. I got this message that said, you'll get your voice back when you figure out what to say. And it felt like a koan, like it felt like an unsolvable paradox. I was like, how will I figure out what to say if I can't sing? And in a way, that was like the seed that was planted for the book to come into existence. But once I was in wilderness on that trip, I just craved it. It was like the experience of solitude and connecting with the wild world. It was like it became kind of an unquenchable thirst after that. I mean, so much that I have moved to the Catskills in New York. Like I have moved to a place where I can just be in wild beauty by stepping out my door.
It's so interesting. I've gotten to do a few more outside adventure trips, and when I like I've told you about you, Greta, but for everyone listening, let's see, last summer I got to go also to Zion National Park and do like for one day 20-mile hike in through the Narrows, and this it was out just in the wilderness for even 3 or 4 days with just a group of guys there. And when I got back, I felt like anytime I was inside, I felt like withdrawal symptoms. Like I
Yes.
just want to be outside. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I
It's
do. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short.
no,
But yeah,
please.
well, one of the things I do now is like the moment I wake up, I go out barefoot in the yard and do a movement routine. Like 15 minutes, move my lymph around, jump, do some, kind of Tai Chi-esque inspired movement and get the sun on my skin and get the sun in my eyes. And just starting the day like that is so incredible.
Amen.
And you're right about the withdrawal symptoms. Every time I go outside, I always go outside better than inside. Like just in my mind. Oh, even when I'm like, it'll be Tuesday night, 10 o'clock, I'm about to fall asleep. And I'm like, oh shit, I forgot to take the trash out. Even then, I go to take the trash out, outside better than inside. Every time I step outside a door, I say that in my mind.
That's a good reframe to have when it's like raining or when there's a blizzard and you have to go outside. It's like
Yeah, outside better than inside.
I love that. Love that. Yeah. And I've enjoyed my, let's see, 2 visits up there to see you so far since you've moved there. It's
Yeah,
beautiful, beautiful place.
we have another one soon.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yes. Well, as we wind down here, yeah, I, of course, want to give people a chance to know where to find you and follow your story and get the book. But before we do that, is there any final piece of advice or wisdom you'd want to share? If you had a chance to put something on a billboard that everyone was going to drive by, what would you want to put on that?
Oh, I love that question. That's such a good question. Um, hmm. I think say the truer thing. And what I mean by that is just I've found there's always one level of the truth that we can express. And then there's always like the truer true. There's always like the one thing right below where it's like, here's what I think. No, here's what I actually want. I think saying the truer true. That's the thing that I'm working with now, both in creativity and also just like in relationships. I think
Wow,
so. I could come up with a different billboard if you give me a little more time, but that's what
that was good. The say the truer thing. So
the truer true. Yeah.
yeah. So there's not, it's not just binary true or not true. It's a gradient. Less
Yeah.
true, more true, more true.
I do this exercise with my students, which is inspired by something I read about in Melissa Febo's book about memoir, Body Work, where you ask them to describe an experience. So it could be like, tell me the story of your first kiss in 3 sentences. And then you ask them to cross it out and say it in a way that's truer. And then you ask them to cross it out and say it in a way that's truer. And you do it 4 or 5 times. And it's amazing because everyone has that level that is below what they initially told.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very insightful. I love that. I love that. Well, for everyone listening to this, that'll give you a sense of the depth of insight that Greta has, that I'm grateful to know you and that she shares in the book here. So how can people find you? Best place, is it Instagram? Is it what's that subscription
Yeah.
thing called? I just
Oh, I'm on Instagram, Greta Morgan. I have a Patreon.
Patreon is the thing I was. Thank you.
I have a Patreon. My website's gretamorganmusic.com for workshops and all that kind of stuff. And then I have a Substack where it basically my newsletter. So if people want to come look up long COVID resources or look up other things related to the book, pretty much any of those places would be good.
Amazing. And when we release this, the book will have just been released. So best place to get The Lost Voice is it, people, if people are used to going on Amazon or go to Barnes and Noble, or where's the best place to?
What I have been told from HarperCollins is to just buy wherever you would normally buy a book. If you want an autographed copy, the Golden Notebook in Woodstock, New York, which is my local amazing bookstore, they will have autographed copies. And in general, I love supporting the indies. So
I
that would
love
be
that.
great.
So here in Austin, that's Book People.
Yes, book people.
Yes. The Golden Notebook, goldennotebook.com, right? Is the
I think it's Golden Notebook Bookstore. They can just Google Golden Notebook Woodstock. It will come up.
nice. Very good. Well, Greta, thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on here and sharing your story. And I love that. The truer true. That's a good note here. But yeah, it's great to hear everything from your story. The experiential, subjective, human, emotional side, and then also the medical side and everything. It's fascinating, and I think everyone listening to this will have gotten some great nuggets of wisdom and inspiration and interesting, thought provoking here. So thank you, Greta, and thank you everybody for tuning into this episode of the Undercurrent Podcast.
Thank you.